Welcome to the program. It's good to be back in the studio. Now for a COVID-19 update. Victorians living in coronavirus hotspots banned from leaving their homes, as well as excluded from the Queensland border reopening. We're really copping the brunt of it here. New South Wales residents urged to keep their doors closed to Victorians. Very tyrannical measures being taken for the New World Order. But some of you might know, last week I captured what appeared to be an unidentified flying object. A UFO report was submitted, and I thought what better guest to have on the show than Joanne, who runs a UFO and ET experiences support group. Joining me is Joanne from the ET Newsroom. Joanne has interviewed many ET and UFO witnesses and has a wealth of information on the subject. Thank you for joining me, Joanne. How are you going there?
Nice to meet you, Jeff, and hello there in Australia. I'm not sure what the time is now, but it's about 10:15 a.m. here in sunny, well, actually it's overcast Hastings at the moment.
Yes, I'm sure you're used to that weather. Now, fascinating research what you've done. What led you to this path of delving into all of this information regarding ETs and unidentified flying objects?
Hey Jeff, it's interesting. I am one of those people who never had an epiphany moment. It's really like an accruing of experience over years. And my first impulse, actually, I guess I would call it spiritually orientated, without the encumbrance, let me say, for myself of doctrine or creed. So I was born, if you like, with an innate sense of something else, something more than us, and that kind of was a driver behind me. And all what that did was to sort of give me another facet, I think, or give me a facet, not another, of myself. And I began exploring that, if you like. But then when I was a youngster, I had don't think I've ever talked about this live or at all. Right, okay. I had a brother who died a cot death, and I was only 10. And suddenly I was so angry at whatever this force was that brings us all in, we might call it God, the absolute or whatever, that I consciously as a child disconnected, because I couldn't bear to see the pain of my parents and feel my own pain. Isn't this interesting? I haven't ever talked about this before on camera. Anyway, but so for the next 10 developmental years, up until I was, coming to 20, I began my initial thing in life, step in life, was through theatre. And so I did all that training, and then isn't it interesting how the universe, shepherds us back? When I was doing a particular venue in Glasgow, one of the actors was Glaswegian. They said, look, there's an amazing lady coming up called Queenie Nixon. Queenie Nixon was a transfiguration medium. I know we're not talking about anything to do with ETs and UFOs, but are we not, or are we? I think somehow there's all a link of this plane of information, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But when I saw Queenie Nixon, who, for people who don't know what a transfiguration medium is, and I've only ever seen one, and that was her, and she's probably long gone off the planet, tiny little lady. She sat with us as an audience and many, many people in this big hall in Glasgow, and she sat on stage darkened with the red light. I wasn't used to this kind of thing at all, so this was a new experience to me. And there she proceeded to bring through her guides and this kind of thing. And as she did so, her whole face changed. Her whole being changed. And one of her guides was a very, very tall Scots, and she had a Scots accent, but she brought in this kind of doer. In Scotland they have this word doer, which means slightly serious, not too much fun kind of personality, a little bit heavy, and it comes through in the speech patterns. So she brought in this rather doer, and she's not doer. She was quite a bright, sparky lady, very nice, and she appeared to grow in stature. Honestly, it was really extraordinary. So anyway, that led me to go to a spiritualist church when when I'd finished that job in London, and this chap said to me, "You hear your name being called, don't you?" And I was astonished, because when I had come back from college as a young person to see my parents, that kind of thing, now and again in the house, I would hear my mother's voice calling my name, which is Joanne, Joanna, and it was strong enough that I would, if I was nearby, I would shout, "Yeah, what do you want?" And then she might say, "Oh, I didn't say anything," but I didn't think anything of it. It was just not strong enough. But the moment, and I'd never thought about it again, but that happened several times. But the moment that guy mentioned it, it's like all the times my name was called came back. How strange, right? He said, "This is your grandmother." So it made sense that it was my mother's voice, because her mother, and I really don't remember what her voice sounded like. She died when I was quite young. And so I felt myself being re-hooked plugged back into I'm going to call it the matrix, but not the matrix as is negatively implied. I'm talking about the higher functioning matrix that is also part of the universal mind, or whatever, that brings us all in for this experience. So that kind of journey into consciousness sort of started my ball rolling. And then another factor was that I have a sister with multiple sclerosis, and she these days is quite compromised by that. And so during my earlier years, I began passionately to have an interest in complementary health and other systems of health and wellness, rather than the allopathic. So rather than vaccines, rather than pills and potions and all that, unless they were what I'd sourced, and I became, that was my impulse. So that led me I love it. I think it's really amazing. So you'll see what I mean by accruing. And then by the by, time and years go on. And so I'm still on this stuff, this pathway. And it's meditation, you name it. I became a regression therapist. I did all that training, which I now would call definitely quantum healing, because it definitely goes into all of these other layers. Though if there is a past life issue that needs to be dealt with, that surely will come up. Anyway, with all of that, I met some wonderful people. One of them knew Sixto Paz Wells, was her best buddy. And Sixto Paz Wells is a Peruvian contactee. He started something called Mission Rama, which is based in connecting human-initiated contact with extraterrestrials, that kind of thing. He began that when he was only 17. He's mid or late 60s now, and he's been traveling the world speaking about his experience. I met him a few times. I did Across the Kitchen Table, filmed a couple of sessions with him, with my friend, and so that opened me up and to all of that world. And then in the Philippines, I had I went to the Philippines to meet psychic surgeons, that kind of thing. And that led me to all kinds of other things, and this ET thing became a bigger and bigger strand. And then moving on, I just began exploring it. And then in 2011, when I started the Ammach Project, which Ammach stands for Anomalous Mind Management, because by this time I'd realized there's a lot of mind control involved in whatever this is, and also other things that humans have developed in things like MK Ultra and all the rest of that, which is not so great for humans.
It's a very fascinating research that you've been doing, and I appreciate you providing me with that exclusive. So it was a set of tragic events. It led you questioning reality and consciousness, and then you witnessed what could be described as a shapeshift, someone growing larger in length, very bizarre circumstances. And then through a lot of delving into paranormal, it unearths more subjects that really deserve the time and respect and the investigation. And that just opens up even more doors, doesn't it, when you look into it? And that led you to setting up a support group for ET and UFO experiences a lot of people, they feel isolated from their communities after such an experience, don't they, Joanne?
Absolutely. And you know what, Jeff? I soon realized that a lot of people are marginalized, and I'm right there for the underdog. I can't bear a bully, and I really find it abhorrent that just because somebody has an out of the box experience, and I've been there myself, it made me want to do something about it. And this support group I set up in the UK, I wanted to be a platform where people could come and have, if they want a confidential chat, they could do that. Or I was hoping that they would actually come on camera with me and tell their story through an unjudgmental ear. And also, there's going to be nobody sniggering, nobody, countering that, but to listen to this testimony of a human experience. And, I can say that people say to me, oh, well, do you believe everything you hear? You know what? It's not about me believing everything I hear. It's about me believing that this human being in front of me has had an experience, and I can open my compassionate heart and listen to that. And yes, that, I'm not saying I'm without judgment. It's something, it's a work in progress, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, I do my due diligence as much as I can. But, in this field, you will know, Jeff, that there's very little in the way of evidence. But there is evidence, but there's just not the evidence that, the judges might want, or the barristers, if we were to take this into a court of law. But actually, I do believe nowadays that if we put the experiencer experience and the UFO experience as a concept in court to be tried, that we would win hands down.
Absolutely, I believe that too. And the government refuses to acknowledge the existence of ET and UFO craft. A lot of television networks, if they broadcast any video footage, they risk losing their broadcasting license, or there's big fines that can be incurred. So they're really doing their best to suppress this information, which really hinders the whole disclosure movement, doesn't it?
It's, there's been a process to dumb down humanity for eons. And, I think that's becoming more and more evident. It's certainly what my research tells me. This is nothing new, this is not new knowledge or new information, but it is now ramping up a little bit. But, the powers that be do give us little tidbits of information. We can talk about the Nimitz, the 2004 American, excuse me, real frog, affair where, suddenly, it's a couple of years ago now, the government's released details about this whole event, and so we're getting things, and they're releasing things. And then you've got people like Grant Cameron, who's a fantastic researcher who spent nearly 30 years, for example, researching what the presidents knew. And that's an amazing body of work. What a legacy. And now he had an epiphany just to talk about, the consciousness thing, because that's the real thing that matters. It's where this takes us in our consciousness. Is this, or are these experiences changing us? Oh, yes. Oh, God, yes.
Yes.
They are. Listen, no matter how much trauma we experience, the human race experiences through ET contact in one way or another, and it's not all traumatic, but some people do have trauma from it, and there is no setup to deal with that. It's only like they talk about the PTSD. Lots of experiences do suffer with PTSD because it's a humongous shock because there's no education, because nobody's prepared for this. So those that have a friendly eye for our development and consciousness, have to bash us over the head, really, metaphorically speaking. Yeah. and I perhaps believe, excuse my voice, I perhaps believe that there are soul contracts, and part of what we've come here to do, especially at this time, Jeff, is to help wake up this planet from its smog-like, dreamlike sleep, and get out of this sheeple mentality, and embrace our diversity, and be kind to one another, be compassionate. And, you know, talking about compassion, because if we can't have that, then what are we as humans, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge, huge qualifying point that has us head and shoulders above, you know, other creatures, perhaps. And I'd like to say that I want to just show you, flag up this book. I wrote this back in with a guy called Bill Brooks back in 2016. And the reason I'm mentioning this as well is because this guy, he was 44. This book is called 44, based on an ex-soldier's true story of lifelong encounters involving alien abduction or encounters, and a lot more besides.
Excellent.
So he was 44 when he had a download, which you could interpret like a near-death experience, in effect, when his whole life was shattered. And this was a guy who came from a very poor background. This is Bill Brooks. He went into the army at 18 because he was getting into trouble, you know, typical lads and all that. So he was in the army for 6 years, seconded to the nuclear regiment in Sennelager, Germany, where he shared a base with, I mean, and you can't make this up either, personnel from Area 51. And because it was a nuclear establishment, they had Honest John rockets there, and apparently underground, those technicians were keeping all things tickety-boo there. And the Brits were not allowed to fraternize or have association with the Americans. Very, very interesting thing this, because within 1 week of being seconded there as a young 18-year-old, and he didn't know anything of life at all, apart from growing up in a tough neighborhood in the middle of England, an area called the Black Country, Stourbridge area, and that kind of thing. He was abducted, and the first time forcibly, I mean, at gunpoint. I never heard of that before. But anyway, this guy, old Bill Brooks here, well, actually, that's not his picture there. He has had so much trauma, so much to deal with, and he had no one to tell. I mean, back in the day, so he had his download in 1994. Well, that sent him spiraling through, you know, basically alcoholism for 2 years. He thought he'd gone crazy, because here was a guy who did not believe in this kind of thing. He would have thought that you and I, Jeff, speaking about this kind of thing today, were complete fruitcakes. Yeah. I mean, he says this quite openly, but he said also, Joanne, you know, I didn't believe in anything paranormal, not ghosts, not anything. So he'd got a disabled brother, physically disabled, not mentally. And when, on one occasion when he came back from the army on a, you know, kind of leave, his brother was showing him books with ETs in, aliens, pictures of aliens. And this would have been back in, you know, the 70s. Right. So I don't know which book he'd got, but because Bill left the army in 76, 74, he joined in 68. And so I said to Bill, well, what did you think about that? He said, I just thought that he'd completely lost his mind. I thought that his problem, his physical problem, had all traveled up to his brain. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. He said, I just couldn't countenance. He said, honestly, Joanna, he said, you wouldn't have liked me back then. He said, you know, everything was black and white. I did not believe in this. I really had no time for it. And really, that really cut relations between him and his brother. So that's how locked out, or was he mind controlled?
That's the question. A very powerful testimony. It reminds me of Larry Warren and the Rendlesham Forest, and the debriefing afterwards. The military, they really come on hard with putting the pressure on. There's also a frequent disinformation campaign trying to discredit those that step forward. So there's not much of an incentive to reveal such information. Sometimes they force a psychological evaluation on them as well, and they're put through rigorous tests and scrutiny, aren't they?
Yeah, you know, it's very interesting that, you know, you say about that, because on that major experience, and Bill's had many, And what it taught him. So imagine living your life, anybody who hears this, imagine living your life till you're 44, if you're lucky enough to get to 44 and beyond. And imagine that you're living one life involving nothing to do with consciousness development, spirituality as a concept. You know, I'm not saying he's not a spiritual person. He's actually very spiritual without giving it a label like that. He's very compassionate, but without allowing for anything on the outer fringes of life. And then and you know, that's died in the war. You know, nothing's going to change your mind. You are that blokey bloke, and that's your opinion, and forget anybody else, right? So when you have that paradigm well and truly shattered, so the glass ceiling that you keep bumping your head against is well and truly broken, and you are out there in a universe that you don't recognize, imagine what that does to you. I mean, he honestly thought he'd gone crackers. And then he couldn't find anybody to share this with. He was in a state of trauma. He really needed to know that he wasn't going crazy. And, you know, he spent the next sort of 20 odd years looking for someone. And he was mainly, at that time, people weren't interested. They were interested in angels and fairies, and nothing wrong with that. But nobody wanted to talk about abductions and experiences in life that had caused him, you know, trauma.
And it is frightening too, isn't it? There has been reports of unidentified craft, and then what follows is a beam, and then that sends the abductee onto a ship, and what follows then has been reported to be truly ghastly. Some people are prodded and probed, samples are taken, and this horrifying experience. Sometimes these memories that have been suppressed are brought back through hypnosis as well, aren't they?
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, Bill never had any hypnosis or regression work. When he was 44 in 1994 and had this memory drop on him, he'd actually been working a gig because he was a musician after the army. He did various jobs, but then settled as a singer musician. Very good one as well. And on this one evening, he was driving over the Bowman Mountains, and that may be a familiar place or name for some people, because I think it was either 73 or 74. There was an alleged crash, a UFO crash in the Bowman Mountains. And those are not sort of huge, high-peaked mountains. It's mainly an elevation that it has lots of high hills. Yep. So no big mountain peaks, just to give you an idea of the terrain. And so there's a big road. And what I did with Bill, when I heard his story, you know, it was very hard for me to wrap my head around, because things and events happened that I could not believe he couldn't question or didn't question. And he said to me, Joanne, I just didn't know. And I'll give you an example if we get time later on. But when on the evening of this experience, so it was in the early hours, he was coming back over the Bowman Mountain. He now remembers, but not at the time. After the download later that evening, or in the early hours of the morning, he saw what happened to him on the journey home, and he was followed by a UFO coming over him. And he said he had a big old Volvo, and those big Volvos have huge long bonnets or hoods.
Yep.
And he could actually see, he said, the reflection of the UFO on his bonnet like a mirror shining. But he said it was interesting because it followed the contours of the land. Anyway, so look, that was that. And he forgot that the moment he got home. But what we found out, or what he realized, he said, it's funny, he said, because I seem to just find myself, you know, pulling up at home. So he lost 26 miles. We found out. We went and measured. I went to all the major locations that this guy had events. Yep. Did all that field trip work, and he thought it might have been just a mile or two or whatever.
Yes, that's quite common, isn't it? Many witnesses have missing time associated with their experiences. This is quite common, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very, very common. So then, so if that's not kind of crazy enough, right? I mean, you folks at home listening to this, just imagine this. Try and wrap your brains around this. Because I still find it incredible, still find it an amazing story. And then, so he gets home and he's got quite an expensive guitar, which is pride and joy. And he's got a new baby who's about 8 months old. And that's the two pride and joy things in his life, his baby and his guitar. So I'm telling you that for a reason. You'll hear that in a minute. So as he pulls up, he thinks the first thing is, I'm going to put my guitar away safely. So before he does that, he looks at, and I've been to this location, and this event was only about 50 yards from his front door. And he said, as he's looking up across the road there, it's in a bit of a cul-de-sac, just to give you an orientation. So no big open spaces. He said there was a 300-foot approximate, tall, conical looking object that was just hovering off the ground. So really close. And it was full of electrical activity, as if it was sparking off the body of it. And he went up to it. He said, I stood, and he was in the army. He trained in electricals and the vehicle maintenance and some other things. So he knew about electrics, and he said, I could have just touched it. He didn't, but he was that close. And he stayed there. He said he stayed there for about 20 minutes. I went, wow, okay. And I said, did anything happen? He said, no, I was just fascinated. And I said, so, Bill, what did you think that was? He said, well, he said, there's a place called Oswestry, and it was about 5 miles away. He said, I thought there must be a fair there, and this must be a laser projection, a hologram. And of course, it could have been a hologram, not from the fair, but I rather suspect it was a material object because of the electrical sparking, and he could have touched it, and it was huge. As in the army, he was also a sniper, so he'd got a very good grounding in size of things and distance and all the rest of that kind of thing. So then he just went inside. He went indoors, and then he simply sat down, did he forgot what he'd just seen. Instantly, like that, forgot that he'd just lost 26 miles of time, forgot that he'd seen a UFO through the Bowman Mountain, following him through the Bowman Mountain, and forgot that there was a UFO outside his door.
Wow,
I love it. Honestly, I still find it amazing. I spent nearly 4 years writing this book.
Yeah. And there's a multitude of different craft, flying saucers, cigar-shaped craft that are said to be carrying reptilian, and some have a cloaking mechanism where they can turn invisible as well.
Oh yeah.
It really is quite an extraordinary phenomenon, isn't it?
It is. And just to finish off that bit of Bill, and then I'll tell you about a reptilian experience that he had. He's had experiences with three lots of beings. The what we would call the Nordics, or are commonly called the Nordics, the humanoid, very human-looking, very blonde folks. The reptilians, she said, looked a bit like alligators with a tail, but bipedal, and the greys. Again, very generalizations, but that's what he would say. So when he went inside, having instantly forgotten what he'd just seen, he put his guitar away under his baby's cot and went and sat down and did what he normally does, which is to have a drink, relax, have a smoke, turn the TV on in the background. Not that there was anything on in those days much, but just for some background, company, whatever. And he was just analysing his gig, going over what all that was going on. And then he said, suddenly, the walls seemed to kind of like melt, undulate, as if there was something making them plasticized, and hieroglyphs. He said it's the only thing. Now, Bill has no education. He couldn't read and write even when he went into the army, and they told him, oh, don't worry, you'll soon pick it up. Really? He did, but it makes me wonder what else the army knew about him before he went in. But back to this event, he was then astonished to have his attention drawn to the TV, where he perceived two or three aliens, grey aliens. And if that wasn't as if they were coming out from the TV, And if that wasn't a shock enough, having your consciousness assaulted with those images, he had a download, and it really was like a near-death experience where your whole life flashes before you, and he saw his whole life that he knew, and the bit that he didn't know up until that time, which was all the ET abductions and interactions and whatever. Now, the interesting thing is, excuse me, he said, I would have thought that I'd gone mad and had a psychotic moment had it not been that thereafter the abductions continued, except this time he was aware of it. He didn't necessarily know all the what happened on the craft. There was one occasion when he did, but he knew when it was happening. He knew that they were coming, and he began to develop certain abilities, certain areas of elements of precognition. And this is not unusual in the experiencer community either. Often I don't know whether it's a consequence, like a fallout of their having been exposed to certain different frequencies which trigger within the human DNA certain faculties, because some become very, very artistic and very good artists. Some develop more musical skills and have a much more, intense connection between their intuition, if you like, the intuition process. And, like you hear many incredible musicians talking about how they had a song just come down, and many are experiences.
Truly,
and that leads me,
isn't it? And to have that information download, a lot of encounters, they say that happens telepathically, where they're able to put thoughts and implant them into somebody's brain. That's how they do that, and it truly is marvelous. But yeah, post-traumatic stress, it's enough to reduce some abductees to tears when they start to.
And then a bit. As you may know, Jeff, that and I've certainly spoken to quite a few people who have lost their associations of loved ones, daughters, sons, husbands, wives, because of their experiences, because the other parties cannot believe it, cannot have something so crazy in their lives, because there's a big fear factor, because it's the unknown. And sometimes there is an intergenerational thing going on as well, but there is a lot of fear around it. But I think a lot of that is also to do with the fact that we are not educated. We are not, nothing is shared in this regard. So of course these things are a shock to us, and humans in shock, it impacts us a lot. And there's very little support for experiences, which is why I set up the Ammach Project. And just to come full circle to that, I was working with somebody who was now very much an ex-colleague at the time, doing interviews. This is sort of from 2011 till 2012-ish, 2013. And so I was running the Ammach Project, and we were doing these interviews and what have you. They were doing the filming and editing. And then in 2015, this is how it goes sometimes with researchers, my website was hacked to Hades with porn torrenting through. And the guy who was helping me develop my website a bit more suddenly called and said, Joanne, you've got to shut it down immediately. Your website's been hacked, I can't save it. He managed to save most of the information, but he said, we can set up one immediately, but this has to go, because he showed me the real live links of this. Honestly, it was like a waterfall and sadly, a lot of people were piggybacking my site and had infected it. So it's as if some facets of life do not want us to continue providing a platform. And I've had quite a lot of interference one way or another, but that just to bring things up to speed with the banner under which I'm working now, it's called the ET Newsroom, because I just had to pluck a name out of the air, and that was the first thing that dropped into my head. So the ET Newsroom Yeah, or ETN is what I'm kind of under the banner of. And for the last few years, I've been doing various things, including interviewing people, but not so much of that at the moment. But what I did do late 2018, and that's bringing the musical part in, is I produced with a wonderful guy this album. I don't know whether you guys can see that properly.
Eclectia.
Eclectia. And Eclectia is an album mainly contribute with contributors who are experiencers, which is really exciting. So either they've had deep, profound experiences like UK, Mike Oram, and oh gosh, we've got so many who've had deep, profound experience. We've got Thunderbeat Devara on there. She has been interacting with the beings from Sirius since she was 4, and they were telling her that music is healing, and they wanted her to use music for healing, and that's what she spent her whole life doing. So it's very exciting, very wonderful. So this album actually it's beautiful. The guy who did all the artwork, I'm going to put my finger on his head so you can maybe see the guy here, this guy here. This is Dan Vallely. Dan Vallely did all the artwork.
It's almost like to take off the Sgt. Pepper's Beatles.
Yeah, you know, when he did this, so we got lane 1, lane 2 for our thing, and then the discs are absolutely fabulous. I'm going to show you these. Just because it's a work of art. Oh, it's upside down. There we go.
Good one. But that's very frightening that they planted malicious files and they tried to set you up and sabotage all your tremendous work. A lot of people that have come forward have experienced harassment and stalking from men in black. They've had their evidence stolen. Their house has been burglarized, even torched to the point of arson. They'll go to any length. They've even seen these people in black trench coats and hats. They don't even look human. And they send these people in to scare and frighten anyone that steps forward and really try and put them in danger and to put that feeling of intimidation across. And that's sort of what happened to you, wasn't it? In more ways than one, setting you up.
Well, yeah, you know, but the you know, there have been things that have happened on a psychic level as well, which I've had to field. But you know, thank goodness I have the tools to handle that. So yeah, you know, a lot of people have been through a lot worse than I have. But yeah, so you know, trying to take the website down, you know, trying to intimidate me in that regard, you know, that's never going to happen. I'm just going to continue rocking and rolling. In 2013, there was a documentary made by a company called Channel 4 in the UK. It's quite a big channel, you know, easily as big as the BBC now and all that. And I was originally pitched, and this was in 2012 initially, that they contacted me by some lovely people of a different production company. And they assured me of integrity, and I was very wary. And but because I really liked these ladies, I thought they were lovely, and I thought, you know what, it's going to be okay. So I pitched then to some experiences to come on board with me, because it was about the Ammach Project, about the work and talking to experiences, that kind of thing. So it's going to be a story about that. Anyway, the Confessions of an Alien Abductee aired on June 13th, 2013, and what a shambolic misrepresentation of the field it was. Far from being a documentary, it was more a mockumentary, and I don't blame the initial people who pitched me, but Channel 4, once they got hold of it, the mainstream media, no integrity was there. And by that time, I'd been railroaded into it, and you know, you know, that was it. And I sustained a, you know, bloody nose, I have to tell you, for 2-3 years after that. But I also had about 300 emails from people saying, gosh, you know, I bet that's not how you wanted that to pan out. Well, of course not. But they also were saying, thank you for being the one to put your head above the parapet. And people saying, I don't feel so alone anymore. Just because it had been, even though they tried to diss everything in the mainstream media and make those experiences look like idiots, with my ex-colleague helping, I think, you know, mostly people are seeing through the sham of mainstream media representation, And you know, that's quite exciting actually, that we are, you know, learning to walk on our own 2 feet with our consciousness, if you like, more engaged. So, you know, sometimes you have to go through these things when you're on the front line.
Yes,
I
very
didn't,
much
I
so.
didn't
Very
plan any.
It's unfortunate and often the case where media uses deceptive practices to get the story, and once
I
they
could,
obtain that, they tend to run a fake news or smear campaign right over the top. It's been happening for decades.
oh yeah. Oh, listen, I'm not unique in this, but in the UK, this was fairly unique. Um, because whilst there, you know, in the UK, you have various other groups, I had sort of put myself out, you know, made it a very public platform, made people very aware that this was for anybody and everybody. In fact, although I had originally thought that it would be a resource for the UK, actually once people started seeing the interviews and that kind of thing, I got contact from all over the world. I was really surprised, and a lot in America, and I was surprised at that too, because there's a lot more in America that's out there where people are you know, talking and supported and being interviewed. So but anyway, that was kind of interesting. So I'm developing at the moment a lot more variables in the platforms, and whilst I'm going to still do the one-to-one interviews, and I'll have one coming out in the next day.
Good work.
Thank you. I'm also doing things like the Eclectic album is going to be a documentary, and I'm working on that at the moment. So we're telling the stories of these guys' lives, which is you know, pretty incredible. And Dan Vallely, by the way, that's the reason I pointed him out, is that if you go to if you put the links to the Eclectic website down there, Jeff, afterwards,
Yep.
people can go and have a look at the gallery section, and they will see a brain scan that Dan had done some years ago. He's probably early 50s now, and this was when he was, I think, maybe early or mid 40s. He had a stroke, very young to have a stroke, but that was the case. And he's an experiencer, like I said, as well as a singer-songwriter. And during the time when he was in hospital with the stroke, he had a week there, and nobody came to see him, which honestly I find hard to believe. But I believe Dan. He's not a liar. And he went to the nurse's station about 3 a.m. one morning and just said, "Look, have I had a stroke? You know, what's kind of going on?" And he was in a room by himself, so he wasn't seeing much traffic, if you like. And out popped a doctor and said, "Oh, Mr. Vallely, yes, but what we're really, yes, you have had a stroke, but what we're really interested in," and this is an interesting word that she used, "we're really interested in the artifact in your brain." Really? Artifact? And when I first met him, I said, "Have you got the scan?" Because he said they scanned him, and he said no. I said, please get it," which he did eventually. And when he went back into it, so he was completely nonplussed by that. He didn't know what that meant. Had no idea. They told him nothing. He was just wanting to know if he could leave the hospital, and was he well enough. The stroke hadn't impacted him too much. And when he got back into his room, he kind of put a thought out to ET in a general way and said, "If this is anything to do with you, you know, let me know." And he looked out his bedroom window there and saw a UFO. So
Well, that could have been confirmation right there.
well, I think it
Yes,
was.
absolutely. And there's so many different beings, small greys, tall whites. We got the Nordic, they blonde hair and blue eyes, and reptilians. And some of these experiences are very much unwanted, and it sends people into bankruptcy, especially the farmers with the cattle mutilations. Some of the eyeballs are taken out, surgical precision, the way it's performed. And with the crop circles, it literally destroys people's financial well-being as well. A lot of people are frightened, and I'd imagine those would be some of the problems that people would bring forward to a group such as yours. A financial impact as well as an emotional and a physical one.
Yeah, the financial element has not been flagged up specifically, excuse me, but of course, things get, all parts of life get impacted. And interestingly, talking about the cattle mutilation element, In one of the experiences that Bill had, a major experience, which he had almost full memory recall of events. And I won't tell you the whole story, we won't have time, but basically he's doing before he got into his music, he's doing a delivery, and it means that he's got to be overnight somewhere. So he decides just to sleep in his cab and drive nearer the second location for the delivery. So in the morning he was ready. Anyway, so he's just having his supper. It's quite late. He's got fish and chips, whatever. He's having, it's completely pitch black. He found a country lane, and then off that another little lane near a field, so he wouldn't disturb anybody, and that was that. And as he's looking over the field, just glancing up, he thinks he's seeing this town. And actually, what we now know later, it wasn't a town, it was probably a mothership.
Wow.
But he didn't know that. And of course, at this point, he's not awake to consciously realize it could be something else. But he noticed the cattle and the animals around, the rabbits behaving rather strangely. He saw the cattle, for example, suddenly go into one area of the field. And then he looked up again, and he saw a kind of a beam coming down and a cow being taken up. And he said the noise it made was intense. And he said it didn't actually sound like what he'd think a cow would sound like in distress. He said it sounded like a horse. I mean, just an interesting little side detail, but it was being taken up. And then he thought, and this is one of the things of Bill, I love him. I said to him, well, what did you think that was then, Bill? He said, well, what do I know? I'm not a farmer. Good question. Oh, a good point, rather. And then I next asked a question. I said, well, what did you think about a cow being, kind of levitated there? He said, I just thought that the farmer that he couldn't see in the darkness had got a forklift, was lifting up the cow. I went, really? He went, yeah, what do I know? Again, I'm not a farmer. I said, well, yeah, okay, get your point. And then he lit a match to light his cigarette, and he said all of a sudden, everything went pitch black. So all the lights that looked like he thought were the city, went out, and he was in complete darkness. And there began one of his major abductions, where he had a full memory recall. And to cut a long story short, I'll just tell you this next bit, and if people are interested, they can read the book. But he was taken into the craft. And as he's taken into one room, he sees through an archway the remains, he thinks, a dead cow. He's sure it's dead. And he sees these guys appear to roll it out of the craft. At which point he remembers freaking out, because he thinks, oh my God, I'm going to die. Oh my God, I'm next, I'm going to die. At which point a little grey comes over, puts his hand on the chest and says, no, you're human.
That truly is remarkable, isn't it? And that is a must read, that book, for anybody. Some of the information in there truly would really open people up to
it's interesting
of what they're going through. Some of their victims and survivors. It really is amazing. I've seen an unidentified craft. I've seen on 3 occasions. The first 2, it appeared to be like a star moving around at night.
Yeah.
And I've seen one last week. I filed a report. It was a blue craft moving in odd trajectories, and it went completely out of sight, and transparent rays of light, something that I've never seen before, and truly amazing. And all these sightings happened roughly a year apart. So, I mean, seeing is believing. Sometimes you try and draw a logical explanation to what you're seeing. And I've also seen satellites, so I can compare it to that, so I can eliminate that.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you got to basically eliminate every option, everything that it could be. And even some of the skeptical people have offered assistance. They try and break it down. They jump on board and try and debunk it. And when they fail, that gives the sighting even more credibility, doesn't it?
Well, it's like Bill said, if if he'd never had another abduction experience or sighting, he used to have some of the most incredible sightings. I mean, really talk about up close and personal. He would have just believed he'd lost his mind.
Yeah, often
And he
that's
did
the
carry
case
on
as
having
well. That's why support groups are so valuable for people to connect with like-minded individuals, people that have suffered truly horrifying experiences. It's a support network, and people can feel comfort and safety with a group like yours. So you're providing something very valuable, and it's very.
I would just say that I am the ET Newsroom, and whilst I have people who can feed in and that kind of thing, it's not a group. It's essentially myself putting out like on spokes of a wheel, you know, doing the interviews, doing the work, and you know, maybe putting people in touch with others who also would be able to offer ongoing support. And if people do, you know, want to go through the regression element, a lot of people don't. They don't really, you know, want to have any more memories than they already have. And certainly for somebody like Bill, he has so many anyway. Plenty he is locked out to, but you know, he's pretty content with. He's got enough on his plate, I think.
It's quite a life. And there are many secret underground bases that are said to house many alien life forms. Dulce, New Mexico, Area 51, Los Alamos. And a lot of people have come forward and explained their encounters. Thomas Edwin Costello is one, Phil Snyder, and some of their testimonials working alongside these entities. A lot of it's in exchange for technology, and they're getting in return sometimes human harvesting. There's an agreement that's been made. Is that your belief as well?
You know, I know about this Treaty of Greada or Greada, and maybe there's been one or two amendments to that over the years. You know, I don't know for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised. I really wouldn't. And I think, you know, I think that what is happening, that there is a, you know, for all that you're saying and all that scary stuff,
yes.
I think that the fallout from that essentially on a positive note, and because we have to bring in what is it that we're getting from this as well, beside, you know, all of those experiences which are challenging for us, and it is that we are growing as individuals. I mean, Bill Brooks, just as a case in point, was a guy completely locked out to many aspects of life because of his lack of education, and then education on the streets, you know, the army and all the rest of that, and his, you know, growing up in poverty, that kind of thing. Not unusual for a lot of humanity. But since his experiences, it has broadened the field of his reference points, and it has changed him. And he may say, I'm not grateful for these experiences. I don't feel, you know, great that it's happened, you know, and why me? Well, you know, who knows, why not? Some people believe that there are soul contracts, and you know, I have to say, I think I'm in that camp, because it seems to me that everything that I've done has taken me on a level higher and higher, or broader and broader, or both, to encompassing a lot more things than I could ever do before. And giving people a platform like Bill, like others, and you know, to explore this, it opens up other people's worlds. So a lot of the shadow and the dark stuff is reflected in who we are as a species, and we need to deal with that black dark shadow stuff and encompass that compassionately. And there are lots of tools and ways to do that. Now, we don't have to be in agreement with what's going on. I don't mean that either, and we don't have to acquiesce to it, but we have to wake up to it. We have to wake up to who we are, and we are multidimensional, powerful beings. And if we knew the degree of our own personal power, and to use it for the positive, and to express that in our environment and with each other, life would change significantly. And it's the same for contact. There's a lot of people who also have very, very positive, life-enhancing contacts, and that are not at all traumatic. They are, you know, soul uplifting and soul beneficent, all of that. So, you know, I think it's important not to get stuck on the negative. We can know the negative, you know, it's not to be blind to anything, it's to encompass it, to be compassionate. And when I say compassionate, we accept it and we think, okay, what can I do to make this better? For me, I'm offering a platform where people can have an ear. I've just launched also something called PACES, and PACES stands for Parent and Child Experience of Support.
That's brilliant.
And I know out there in Australia, you've got Mary, our lovely Mary Rodwell, doing that. And I'm just going to provide a platform in the UK if anybody wants that. There's an email, which is etn.paces@gmail.com. And if parents are worried, I've spoken to 1 or 2 parents in the past, and they have been terrified, absolutely terrified of speaking to anybody. And the 1 or 2 people who have had the courage to speak to me, I haven't made any of their stories public, and I will never. If anybody, you know, says I can only tell you this in confidence, that's what will happen. And these parents are terrified because the child protective services, or whatever they call them in our various countries, are very fast and loose to sweep in on parents and take children. And so I would never endanger the family structure by putting out publicly that something has happened to this family. And interestingly enough, on the interview that will come out in the next day, the interviewee is Vernon Elliott, who's actually from New Zealand, living in Canterbury in the UK. Toward the end of the video, he talks about his child having experiences, and I have to commend him for sharing that. They are, you know, brilliant parents, brilliant people. He's had some experiences. They're not necessarily ongoing. That's Vernon's and the child. But with the child, it was very interesting. I won't spoil it for people. People can see the interview. It'll be up there on my YouTube page and on the Facebook page in a day or so. And again, Jeff, perhaps you want to put those links later on. And I, you know, I've asked Vernon if he would perhaps be there as you know, a sounding board for any other mum and dad that wants to maybe have a chat, you know, about that. But parents were so scared that they might get their child taken off them. They might be, you know, sectioned because they weren't capable as parents, because they'd, you know, spoken about their child having experience, or they, you know, themselves had experiences, that kind of thing. So I'm just putting it out there that parents and, you know, eventually what I want to do, sorry, I'm just getting my thoughts together. I want to provide maybe, you know, a day workshop for mums and dads down the line, if this is what they want, where mums and dads, a small group of parents can come together with their children to talk about it, to talk to somebody like Vernon, and maybe somebody else who's on the counselling side, though I'm on the counselling side as well, so they can share. Because one of the most dangerous things that we do as humans is to internalize and not then work through those things. I say dangerous because it can cause us, you know, our thoughts create us. So if we are constantly worried or frightened, or, you know, all of that, it lowers your immune system. It can cause susceptibility to all kinds of health orientated things that are not in your best interest. So we need to try and keep the energy high, keep our consciousness high. And, you know, if you are fearful or frightened, there are things, you know, that can be done, and people that you can speak to. And, you know, not just myself, but others around the globe. So that's an initiative that I've literally just started this week. So PACES is a new ETN project that's just, and it's going to be a passive project in as much as I'm not going to put a lot out there about it, but it will be eventually on the website, which is the etnewsroom.com, which is also in need of an update. So if there's any fantastic web people out there using WordPress, give me a shout. So there's we have to be cautious how we interpret what's going on, because we don't have full information. We're playing blind here, and we are experiencing things without a full deck of cards. So that's what I would say to that.
I admire how you're approaching those cases very delicately, because it is a very crucial situation. Parents are worried about their children going to school. They start to open up and start speaking about aliens or reptilians, and their parents told them, and then they get an unwanted visit. So yeah, it does really have to be dealt with in a very professional manner, which is exactly how you're executing that. Very important, and that's a very good strategy to have for somebody to approach yourself and confide in you, having that comfort and that peace of mind, knowing that that would stay with you, and they're able to live their life in peace, not in fear of any repercussions from any criminal.
What I'm also hoping, Jeff, is that one day we can get a group of parents on camera talking about their kids' experiences.
Yes, that would be vital for the movement, wouldn't it? More people coming together.
Yeah. I mean, Mary Rodwell's done a fantastic lot of work on all of this. It's fantastic, absolutely wonderful. And so, it is being addressed, but I think it won't hurt if there's a few more options or doorways for people to access down the road. And, I just think we need to keep an open mind. We need to be compassionate about this and try and hold back that judgment. It's very easy for us to go into that judgmental mode. I speak personally, and I have to, rein my own, thinking in sometimes, and listen to the story, and then do, any due diligence that I can. For example, with Bill, in the book we have his army credentials, and we have pictures of him in the army. I'm not going to point him out, but you see that sort of thing. So we know he was in the army, and that's just again, things like that. Although I've blanked out his eyes, so he's not recognizable to any family people. And you know what, we've done that because he was very worried that there might be repercussions still, and his name as Bill Brooks on here is a pseudonym, because when we came to the publishing date, he got very concerned because he has a grown child now, but he did encounter quite a lot of challenging situations, let's say, and he didn't want to put his son in harm's way because of this. So we chose to let him be known by another name. Not that it matters. A lot of people use pseudonyms. It doesn't detract at all from the story. It's just, that we did that because he actually got quite concerned that it might down the road impact his son. And
that's a very wise move to take that precaution. Some people step forward. You never know what could happen. People end up murdered execution style for speaking up about things they shouldn't talk about, classified information released. They do anything they can in their power to silence people. So taking a precaution like that is very understandable. And that's very great advice you stated as well, to raise our vibration up to happiness instead of living in fear and worry and anguish. Because they also say there's these archons that harvest our negative energy and they feed off it. It's like a people farm, and whenever we're panicking and upset, that energy is taken and they're utilizing that. There's many forms, many entities, some that are not even visible in this light realm. So, I mean, to live in happiness without fear and with love in your heart is a very powerful emotion, and that can conquer a lot, can't it?
Yeah, if you think about it, like to make it, to give it a visual. If you think about, a large building and a lift, an elevator, and just think that, at the point of fear and dread and anxiety, depression, let's say you're in, you're kind of around floors 1 to 3, and then when you start raising your frequency and vibration, and that all that we mean by that, it's literally a frequency change in you, and this can be measured, this can be given numbers and colors, just as the lower energies can. And as you raise those, as you become a lighter in yourself, and I'm just going to say once more, your thoughts affect directly your body mind system. So if you come in with a tendency to some health condition or another, if you stay within the lower elevator floors of 1 to 3, in this example, you will be likely or susceptible to any conditions that will impact, that are known to impact those areas that you may have a susceptibility for. And before you know it, you're drawn down into further anxiety and what have you. It's not that you don't have any illness or any things to deal with. When you raise your vibration, it just means that you have a different approach to it. So when you take that lift and you're up to the 4, 5, 6, 7 and beyond, and you get, and this isn't a Pollyanna thing, this is about smelling the roses, this is about enjoying the coffee, this is about, no matter what is going on in the world, be in the eye of the storm, all that craziness that's going on around, whatever that is in your personal life or on the larger global stage, that's not you. You're here, you're you, center yourself. And if you don't want to do meditation, don't do meditation. Go and sit outside in the beautiful sunlight and have a coffee. Or if it's raining, cozy up under a duvet and read a good book, watch a nice film, laugh, enjoy your, society with those that you resonate with. And you know what? If there are people in your environment that you don't resonate with, cut the cord, let them go. You deserve better.
Wonderfully
You deserve
said.
the
That's
best.
an excellent description. I really want to thank you for appearing on the show. This has been a very enlightening broadcast. I'm very impressed with the services that you've set up, all the wonderful work that you have done. I wish you the very best in the future, and I look forward to hearing more progress and more results that you keep making.
Thanks very much, Jeff. It's been a delight speaking to you, and thanks for reaching out.
Well, that does it for today's episode. Be sure to like, share and subscribe for more riveting information on UFO, ET and unexplained phenomena. Consider becoming a patron. A small donation can keep this operation running. So definitely worth contemplating, and I'll catch you on the next show where we expose corruption and provide education and enlightening information. One show at a time.